What up, everyone? This is Mr. Lord Dark Professor Dark Joker with this week's video. And this week will be an edition of History Behind Fiction, where I go over the history that inspired or is like the setting of a fictional product. So for this week, I'll go over the history behind Assassin's Creed 2, Lineage, Discovering Brotherhood. So basically these are a lot of your it games that are based in Italy. So there's like some amongst the really early Assassin's Creed games. So yeah, I'm gonna go over some of the history behind those. And with all that being said, on with the video. First off, I'm gonna get into some of the different historical figures associated with these games. You know, a lot of them that appeared as characters, whether they're Templars or assassins or allies of one of the factions. Giovanni Auditore. Now, of course, this is Ezio's father in the game in Assassin's Creed 2. So he is loosely based on Giovanni Villani, who was born in 1276 or 1280. It's not really known. He wrote a lot of the history of Florence, Italy in the Chronica. He was a member of the Cloth Merchant Guild, Art Arte di Calimala, starting in 1300. Shareholder of the Peruzzi Bank from 1300 to 1308. And he traveled around Italy, France, Switzerland, and Belgium as a factor of the Peruzzi Bank. And he became the co-director of the Bologna Corsi Company in 1324. He fought the Battle of Alto Pasquio against Pastruccio Pastricani after a natural disaster and the bubonic plague, aka the Black Plague, started. Volani was convinced that the apocalypse was starting. Of course, we know that that was not the apocalypse. And after the Bologna Corsi company went bankrupt, he was imprisoned in 1346, and he ended up dying of the bubonic plague in 1348. Christina Vespucci. She's based off of Simonetta Cardeneo Vespucci. She lived from 1453 through April 26 to 1476, and she was considered to be one of the most beautiful women of the time, and she was possibly a model for multiple Florentine painters. And she married Marco Vespucci, who was the son of Amerigo Vespucci's cousin in 1469. And Giuliano Medici nominated her as the Queen of Beauty after winning the joust. Leonardo di San Piero da Vinci, of course, as we probably know him as Leonardo da Vinci, he lived from April 15th, 1452 through May 2nd, 1519. He became a garzone or studio boy for Andrea del Verrocchio at 14 and an apprentice at 17. He later became the master in the Guild of St. Luke in Florence, Italy in 1472, and he became very famous as a painter, architect, and engineer. And he moved to Milan in 1482. Now he had to flee to Venice and then later returned to Florence in 1500 after Duke Ludovico Sforza was defeated by King Louis XII of France. And he worked for Cesare Borgia as an engineer from 1502 through 1503. Lorenzo di Piero de' Medici. He was also known as Lorenzo the Magnificent. He lived from January 1st, 1449 through April 9th, 1492. He became the leader of the Florentine Republic and Medici Bank in 1469. He was injured during the Pazzi conspiracy in 1478. He was excommunicated from the Catholic Church by Pope Sixtus IV, who had King Ferdinand I of Naples and Duke Alfonso of Calabria invade the Florentine Republic. And he traded with Sultan Mehmed II of the Ottoman Empire. He mined alum in Tuscany, which led to a revolt against Florence, and Medici had Tuscany sacked. His son Giovanni became Pope Leo X and his nephew Giulio di Giuliano became Pope Clement VII. Caterina Sforza. She lived from 1463 through May 28, 1509. She was the illegitimate child of Galeazzo Maria Sforza. She married Girolamo Riorio in 1473. Now, Girolamo died in April 14th, 1488, because he was killed by the Orsis, and Caterina's kids were held hostage. She was a regent in Forli for her son Ottaviano, and she became the lover of Giacomo Feo. And some of the supporters of Ottaviano usurped Giacomo and Caterina. She later married Florence ambassador Giovanni de' Medici il Popolano in 1496. She defended Forli from the Borgias from Venice, and she lived in Florence after escaping Cesare Borgia. Niccolo di Bernardo de Machiavelli. He lived from May 3rd, 1469 through June 21st, 1527. He's possibly descended from the Marquis of Tuscany. It's not confirmed. He was appointed second chancery after the death of Girolamo Savonarola. He was the secretary of the D, uh, DCD Liberta y Pace, and he married Marietta Corsini in 1501 and had 5 sons and 2 daughters. He praised Cesare Borgia in his writings, so obviously that's a lot different than the games where Machiavelli was an assassin. Obviously, he did not like the Borgias, and now Machiavelli was later exiled after the Medici's retook Florence with the help of Pope Julius II. Bartolomeo de, Alviano. He lived from 1455 through October 7th, 1515. He served as a condottiero in service of the House of Orsini and King Ferdinand II of Spain. He was imprisoned from 1509 through 1513. Rodrigo Borgia. So he was born Roderick Loncal y de Borgia. He lived from 1431 through August 18th, 1503. He became the sacristan at the Cathedral of Valencia in 1445. He was ordained as a deacon and became a cardinal in 1456. He was appointed the vice chancellor in 1457. He became the archbishop of Valencia in 1492. And he became Pope Alexander VI on August 11th, 1492. He had 10 illegitimate children that we know of, and appointed them to political positions and made a bunch of marriage alliances with them. So that's why Lucrezia had a bunch of husbands. He's yeah, and of course Cesare, of course, being put in a lot of positions. And he was now Rodrigo was rumored to have had an affair with his daughter Lucrezia. I mean, Rodrigo had a lot of affairs. He was probably one of the most degenerate popes ever. Like he makes it go for him to be the most degenerate. I guess Pope infallibility is not a real thing. Who would have thought that? Francesco de Pazzi, he lived January 28th, 1444 through April 26th, 1478. He killed Giuliano de' Medici during the Pazzi conspiracy, and he reportedly wounded his own leg for some reason during the uprising. And after the conspiracy, after it failed, he was dragged from his bed and hanged. Jacopo di Andrea de' Pazzi, he lived 1423 through April 26, 1478. He was a banker in Florence. He fled Florence after the Pazzi conspiracy failed, but he was captured in Hostagno and hanged in Florence. His corpse was stolen from his grave in Santa Croce and thrown in the Arno before some children found it, and then it was hung from a willow tree and flogged before being thrown into the Arno again. Fernando Bandini Baroncelli, he lived January 15th, 1420 through December 29th, 1479. He was a merchant in Florence. He killed Francesco Nori during the Pazzi conspiracy, and he fled for Constantinople after the Pazzi conspiracy, but was captured and hanged for his crimes. Stefano de Bagnon, he lived 1418 through May 3rd, 1478. He was a presbyter and banker in Florence and served Jacopo de Pazzi, and he was hanged for the Pazzi conspiracy after he was captured. Antonio Maffei de Volterra, he lived 1450 through May 3rd, 1478. He was a presbyter, clergyman, and papal notary in Florence. He joined the Pazzi conspiracy to seek revenge against the Medici family for the sacking of Volterra, and he was hanged for his crimes. Francesco Salviati, he lived 1443 through 1478. He was the Archbishop of Pisa from 1474 through 1478. He was hanged for his involvement in the Pazzi conspiracy. Marco Barbarigo, he lived 1413 through August 14th, 1486. He was the 73rd Doge of Venice from 1485 through 1486. He possibly died during dispute between various nobles that his brother Augustino caused. I mean, it's not definitively known if that's how he died. What's known as the day of his death. Girolamo Savonarola, he was also called Jerome Savonarola. He lived September 21st, 1452 through May 23rd, 1498. He served as a friar and preacher in the Catholic Church, and he claimed to be a prophet. And he ruled Florence from November 1494 through March 18th, 1498. He was banned from preaching by Alexander VI, but he ignored the ban when he realized his influence was dropping because he wasn't preaching. And he instigated the bonfire of vanities in Florence, and he was excommunicated by Alexander VI on May 12th, 1497 through heresy and sedition. He was hanged and burned with his ashes spread into the Arno. Luis de Santangel, he lived 1435 through 1498. King John II of Aragon appointed him receiver of the rents and funds of the royal heritage in Valencia in 1475 and courtier in 1478. He was appointed Escribano de Racion by King Ferdinand of Aragon. He was the confessor and personal advisor to Queen Isabella of Castile. He helped secure funding for Christopher Columbus's voyage, and he tried to help Jews escape during the Spanish Inquisition. Christopher Columbus. So obviously, this guy is like the most historical figure in these games, like this set of Assassin's Creed games. And so he was born sometime between August 25th, 1451 through October 31st, 1451. And he died May 20th, 1506. He was self-taught in geography, astronomy, and history, and he also learned like multiple languages. He planned to sail west to get to Asia because obviously, look, so despite popular opinion, a lot of people knew that the Earth was round. Like it wasn't necessarily Columbus's idea. that the Earth being round. Now, no one knew, very few, if any, knew about the you know, the Americas. Of course, they weren't called. I mean, the ones that did knew maybe were maybe some descendants of the Vikings, but they also, I guess, kept that secret. So basically, so Columbus' idea was to sail west to get to Asia instead of going south and deal with, I guess, a lot of like the treacherous like waters down there. He thought going west would be safer, even though it might take longer. And so, of course, we know the story. 1492, Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue. So he crossed the Atlantic Ocean and reached Hispaniola, which we know current day as like Haiti and Dominican Republic. And he accidentally discovered the Americas. Well, rediscovered would be the more, I guess, accurate description of it. Since, of course, you had, Leif Erikson's, Vikings. Of course, you have, the Native Americans and whoever lived on the Americas before the Native Americans, because there were other civilizations that existed there uh, that no longer exist. And so he miscalculated the size of the Earth and distance needed to reach Asia. Very obviously, especially when you have a whole continent that you didn't know about. Now, he returned to Spain in 1493, and he did three other voyages from 1493 through 1496, 1498 through 1500, and 1502 through 1504. He was the first governor of the Indies from 1492 through 1499. He never acknowledged that he did not reach Asia. Like, he never acknowledged it. Like, he was like, no, I was like, no, what are you talking about? I reached Asia. What? And so, of course, he's the reason why a lot of Native Americans, they were called Indians because he thought he had reached India, and so he was like, so that's why a lot of the Native Americans, their term for them is Indians because of Columbus's blunder. Romaste Torquemada. So he lived, October 14th, 1420 through September 16th, 1498. So he was the first Grand Inquisitor of the Spanish Inquisition. He executed many that he deemed heretics. Now, he retired in 1494 to a monastery due to some bad health and possibly due to being seen as a liability by the Catholic Church because there were a lot of complaints about the Inquisition's actions. Yeah, so, and of course, he was in like the historical section of the Assassin's Creed movie. He was the main villain in that. Of course, you had, the big bad in the present day section, where the historical section was, you know, kind of a second fiddle to the present day stuff in that movie. So yeah, gosh, that movie was freaking terrible. Abu Abdallah Muhammad XII. So he was also known as Boabdil. So he lived from 1460 through 1533. He was the 22nd and last Sultan of the Nasrid dynasty of Granada from 1482 through 1483 and 1487 through January 2nd, 1492. He was imprisoned during the gap years after invading Castile and being captured in Lucena. And he surrendered Granada after the Granada War and was exiled. And there's various sources about some of his travels. That there's also conflicting reports on where his like gravesite is at. Queen Isabella I of Castile. She lived April 22nd, 1451 through November 26th, 1504. She was also known as Isabella the Catholic for, well, obvious reasons. She was a Catholic. You know, basically she instigated the Spanish Inquisition. So she was the Queen of Castile and Leon from December 11th, 1474 through November 26, 1504, and the Queen Consort of Aragon from January 20th, 1479 through November 26, 1504. She was the wife of King Ferdinand II. She ruled during the War of Castilian Succession 1475 through September 4th, 1479, and the Granada War February 1482 through January 2nd, 1492. Fabio Orsini, he lived 1476 through December 29th, 1503. He was a condottiero and lord of Mentana. He fled due to his involvement in the Mangione conspiracy against Cesare Borgia. He died of a head wound at the Battle of Garigliano. Cesare Borgia. He lived September 13th, 1475 through March 12th, 1507. He studied law at Studium Orbis. He became the bishop of Archdiocese of Pamplona and Tudela at 15 and Archbishop of Valencia at 17. He was appointed Bishop of Castres and Elne in 1493 and abbot of the Abbey of Saint Michel de Cuxa in 1494. He was appointed cardinal at 18 and left his role at on August 17, 1498 to become the Duke of Valentinios. He possibly assassinated his brother Giovanni. He fought in the Italian Wars, and he was rumored to have an affair with his sister Lucrezia. Yeah. He was captured by Gonzalo Fernandez de Cordoba but escaped. He was ambushed in Viana, Navarre, with his corpse looted. So, like, when he was killed there, basically, he people who found his corpse, they took a lot of, I guess, his weapons, his clothes, and all that. Yeah, freaking messed up. Lucrezia Borgia. She lived April 18th, 1480 through June 24th, 1519. Throughout her life, she had multiple marriages. Basically, they were arranged to help her father, Rodrigo, form a bunch of alliances, gain a bunch of political power. Standard, Middle Ages stuff. That's kind of common thing with nobles. So throughout her life, she was married to Lord Giovanni Sforza of Pesaro and Gradara, Duke Alfonso de Aragon of Bis- Biscaglie, who was also Prince of Salerno, and Duke Alfonso de Este of Ferrara. She had affairs with Marquis Francesco II Gonzaga of Mantua and Pietro Bembo, and she was rumored to have affairs with Pedro Calderon, Alexander VI, and Cesare. Yeah, she was rumored to have affairs with her father and brother. Yeah, which Assassin's Creed Brotherhood and 2 portrayed those rumors as true. Like, in the case of Alexander, the the biographical entry, like the spoken one for Rodrigo, said that Alexander was screwing Lucrezia, and then in Brotherhood, it's not directly stated, but it's heavily implied that she was screwing Rodrigo. Now, they make it very clear that she was screwing Cesare. That is made very obvious. Yeah, that is some messed up stuff. Juan de Borgia Alonso de Romani el Mayor. He lived 1446 through August 1st, 1503. Son of Alexander VI's cousin, Galceron de Borgia y Monsada, and one of 10 cardinal nephews of Alexander VI. He was elected Archbishop of Montreal on on September 13th, 1483. He was appointed cardinal priest of S. Susanna on August 31st, 1492. He was appointed Legate Alater to Alfonso II of Naples on April 18th, 1494, and Bishop of Ferrara on October 29th, 1494. He was the Bishop of Melfi from September 19th, 1494 through December 3rd, 1498. He was appointed the Latin Patriarch of Constantinople on April 24th, 1503. Micheletto Corella. He was a condottiero for Cesare Borgia. He was imprisoned in 1503, but despite whatever torture and stuff that was done, he didn't give any intel on the Borgias. Like he kept his mouth shut as far as the Borgias were concerned. He was freed by Pope Julius II in 1505 and killed in Milan on in February 1508. Nicholas Copernicus. He lived from February 19th, 1473 through May 24th, 1543. He attended St. John's School in Toruń, Poland, and the Cathedral School in Watochtowek, Poland in his childhood. He studied at the University of Krakow from 1491 through 1495, University of Bologna from 1496 through 1501, and University of Padua from 1501 through 1503. Dang, that's a lot of freaking school. Like 4 years, 5 years, and 2 years. That's 11 years of school. Like holy frick! Like for college, holy crap! Now, Copernicus, of course, is very famous for coming up with a heliocentric model of the solar system after studying Aristotle and Ptolemy's models of the solar system. Of course, Ptolemy had a version of a heliocentric one. Well, and Aristotle, of course, was like geocentric, and obviously that was the dominant belief at the time was geocentric because since humanity exists on Earth, it was like makes sense for Earth to be the center of the universe. And so, but the heliocentric model, due to that belief, received a lot of backlash from the Catholics and Protestants. Like the Catholics, so the Catholic Church did not recognize it as truth. Now, there were some that recognized it as a theory, and so the Vatican did not large portion of time the Vatican did not censor the heliocentric model. Basically, as long as you weren't saying God's not real, the Catholics didn't really care. Now there was a point where they were like, no, that is freaking heresy, and I think they accepted the heliocentric model very late compared to the Protestants. Now, when Protestants were against it, they were more harsh than the Catholics. Like Martin Luther, you know, great theologian. Martin Luther was not a fan of the heliocentric model. Very much against it. Like, because everyone was like, with humanity being made the image of God, if humanity's plan's not the center of the solar system, some people would see it as saying that, you know, basically it's like being against God, as well as believe, even though that was not the case. Copernicus was a Catholic, and so he had mostly the issues that already existed with the Catholic Church. But so yeah, Protestants, they were not a fan of Copernicus. Now, later on, of course, different Protestant denominations had different times where they accepted the heliocentric model, but once evidence came in that supported the heliocentric model, Protestants became very accepting of it. Catholics, due to how a lot of their like a lot of the basically there's a lot of red tape comparatively in the Catholic Church compared to the Protestant denomination. So officially they did not accept it until a lot later. Gian Giacomo Prati da Oreno. He was also known as Salai. He lived 1480 through January 19th, 1524. He was the pupil and possible lover of Leonardo da Vinci from 1490 through 1518. Now I'm going to go over some of the major events associated like with these Assassin's Creed titles. The Patsy conspiracy. Obviously, this is like a major plot point in Assassin's Creed 2 during like a lot of like the early portions of the game where Ezio just wants to kill all the Patsies for killing his brothers and father. So this took place April 26th, 1478, on Easter Sunday, after Easter Mass in Florence, Italy. Basically, because they knew that the Medici's would be leaving the cathedral at the time. So the Patsy family and their allies tried to assassinate Lorenzo de' Medici and Giuliano de' Medici and replace Medici rule in Florence. Giuliano was killed, but Lorenzo survived his injuries, and all the conspirators that were captured were executed. The Bonfire of the Vanities. So this took place February 7th, 1497, in Florence, Italy. Um, Basically, Girolamo Savonarola, who was ruling Florence at the time, had objects that he deemed sinful burned, and his extreme actions led to his excommunication by Pope Alexander VI and his eventual execution. Tribunal of the Holy Office of the Inquisition. So this was also called the Spanish Inquisition. It was part of a larger Catholic Inquisition that was going on in multiple Catholic countries in Europe. So it lasted from November 1st, 1478 through July 18th, 1834. It was established by King Ferdinand II of Aragon and Queen Isabel I of Castile. And basically, the Inquisition like punished those that were deemed heretics by the Catholic regime. And this included, Jews, Muslims, Protestants, those who were committing sodomy, alumbrados, aka the Illuminati. That was like some mystical order that claimed to be Christian. You had Freemasons, those who were accused of bigamy. You had blasphemers, or alleged blasphemers, those who were doing witchcraft. And later on, you had those who were like deists. So mostly those who were punished were burned at the stake, but sometimes there were some who were exiled. They were flogged, they were given sentenced to prison, or they were slaves. And the Inquisition was abolished by Queen Isabella II of Spain. Granada War. So this lasted from February 1482 through January 2nd, 1492. It was a series of military conflicts across a 10-year period. So it wasn't like one continuous war, it was just a series of conflicts that occurred. So it formally began with Castile and Aragon seizing Alhama. And some of the major battles include the Siege of Malaga and the Siege of Baza, with both being in 1487. The civil war that was occurring in Granada during this time, it allowed the more unified um, Catholic force to defeat Granada. And that's it. Did you like this video? Did you dislike this video? Did you do you, is there some historical facts I got wrong? Did you like seeing some of the history that inspires these Assassin's Creed games? And in case of one of them was a short film. So if you liked all this, put all that in the comments below. Like, share, subscribe, all that stuff, and look forward to the next video.